Hey everyone, Kathy the Vegan Prepper here, and today we're covering dehydrating frozen butternut squash. We're going to look at the dehydration process, the conditioning process, the powdering process, the volume reduction, the weight reduction, and then rehydrating the powder into a puree. It's a lot of information to pack into a video, but hopefully you are going to enjoy it and get something good out of it. And basically, I had to start filming in the middle of my Azure Standard haul because the box of frozen butternut squash that I bought would not fit at all into my freezer. And so I basically had to start a little faster than I meant to. So we're just gonna slide right into kind of the quick start of the video. And again, yeah, hopefully you enjoy it. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Vegan prepper. Vegan prepper. I've gotten all of the frozen squash laid out onto trays. We have just over 17 cups of frozen organic butternut squash, 5 pounds. And so I'm going to go ahead and get these into the dehydrator and we'll see what they look like once they're finished. The next day, here's what we have. And so there has been quite a lot of size reduction. So these 3 trays are the trays that got 5 cups each. This tray under here is the one that was just over 2 cups. So I will get the contents of the first 3 trays into this jar, and then I will measure what we have. Well, that is well under 1 cup for the first tray, so I'm definitely not going to need a jar this big. We are nearing, or maybe just over the 1 cup mark after the second tray. I'm going to switch this over to a pint jar so that I can more accurately judge the measurements. Pint jars have the half cup marks as well. I believe it is all going to fit into a pint jar. Isn't that kind of incredible? So we have, gosh, here's 1 cup. And then here are the lines, 10, and then here's 12 ounces. So that must be, because each one of these lines is 2 ounces. So here's another 2 ounces. It looks like, here's the 12-ounce line. We have basically just barely over 1.5 cups for each 5 cups of squash originally. So, you know, it's so close. For my purposes, like my math, I think I'm just gonna say 5 cups of frozen squash equals 1/2 cup dehydrated squash. And so we can measure now. There was just over 2 cups on that tray, so almost certainly it will all fit into this pint jar. Okay, yes, all 17 cups fits into a pint jar once it's dehydrated. This right here, I believe, is really the power of dehydration, the space savings. Now, my plan is to turn this into a powder, so it's going to be even smaller once it's a powder. But yeah, that's really exciting. So I will let this sit in the jar with the cover on for a few days and watch for moisture. But first, I would like to weigh this so that we can also see what kind of weight reduction did we get. Obviously, it's been packaged in a jar, but say I were to put it into a Mylar bag instead with an oxygen absorber, it would be closer to the weight. So I'm going to go ahead and dump this back into the big jar for a second so that I can tare the jar, and then I'll get my kitchen scale and we will see how much this weighs now. I did not weigh it before, but I will just sort of have to hope that Azure Standard was accurate, and they did give me 5 pounds. And so we will see, what does this weigh now? All right, I have tared the jar, and now we'll get the contents in here. And obviously this is not going to count towards the final weight. So I will need to shake that up just a second, or just a little bit to get it in there. So give me just a moment. All right, so the total weight from 5 pounds to just under 6 ounces. Major weight reduction. Kind of amazing, actually. So like I said, I'm going to let this go through the conditioning process, and we'll come back once it's time to powder it and see what it turns into then. This is a few days later. I realized kind of last minute that I had a bit of time to take care of this, and my blender was dry at the same time. It's really hard to find a time that I have a dry blender in this house, so I jumped on it without much prep for filming. I am just powdering the conditioned squash now in my blender. Basically, I let it blend, and at first you hear the sound of larger pieces hitting the sides of the blender container, but after a bit, you stop hearing those sounds and you just hear the blender. That's when you know that it's essentially powdered. After powdering, I let it sit for a few minutes to lessen how much comes out in a cloud. I don't know that that ever fully disappears. I'm gonna get the powder onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. I've set my oven for the lowest temperature, let it come up to temperature, and then turned it off. The powder will go into that low heat for 30 minutes to make sure it is 100% dry and to help it not solidify as it sits in the jar, at least not for a while. It will obviously solidify eventually without a desiccant packet in there, but this step helps for it to not happen right away. Once it's out of the oven, I'm breaking it up and getting ready to pour it into the jar using the parchment. Make sure you sort of smooth and unbend the parchment at the end where you're pouring to make a smooth channel for the powder to travel into the jar. From over 17 cups of frozen butternut squash to less than 1 cup of powder. It's unreal. Here is the powder that I made the other day. It's settled a bit. It's been in its jar for a couple of days. We have 3/4 cup exactly, basically, of powder from that original amount. So I'm doing a little bit of math here to experiment to see how much puree basically can I make from the powder. And this is going to be just, yeah, a very experimental thing. Here's my super high-tech graphics. I hope you appreciate it. So basically I have 3/4 cup of powder. As I said, when you do the math on that, that equals 36 teaspoons. In case you didn't know, there are 4 tablespoons per 1/4 cup and 3 teaspoons per tablespoon. So that's where this comes from. My original amount was 17.5 cups of squash, which is equal to 35 1/2 cups. And so fortunately, like super easy. I love it when the math works out like this. These two numbers are very close together. So I'm going to say that essentially 1 teaspoon of powder is equal to 1/2 cup of squash. So for me, understanding, of course, the original measurement did have some airspace because they were dices and it wasn't puree that I dehydrated. I'm still going to say maybe about 1/2 cup of water with 1 teaspoon of powder would make me something like if I had taken those dices and pureed them instead. I hope I'm saying that correctly. So I'm about to go experiment and see if that's true. I'm going to put 2 teaspoons of powder into a measuring cup and then pour over 1 cup of boiling water, let it sit for a while and see if what we get is a puree. All right, I've just poured the water over top of 2 teaspoons of puree. So like I said, I'll just let it sit for probably 5 or 10 minutes and then we'll see exactly what we end up with. You can see some of the larger chunks are rehydrating. I did not strain my powder or sift it. And then, you know, try to only get the small pieces. I just sort of left it as it was. So we will see what happens there. Here is what it looks like after about 15 minutes, because I did get involved in some other things, of course. Now I'm back. So it has settled a bit after that initial stir. I haven't touched it. And so this is kind of what we are looking at. So eager to see what kind of texture are we going to get. So this is definitely not really a thick puree. It is more like still kind of a soup, but it's definitely, it has definitely thickened the water a bit. So I think if I were looking for something that I were going to make as the base of, you know, say, I don't know, like a pie, like if I were going to try to turn this into a substitute for a can of pumpkin, obviously I would need to use more. But I'm pleased with this. I think that it will make a really great soup thickener. Also, I didn't cook this. I just poured boiling water over the top, and I'm wondering if cooking it would make it kind of suck up more water and thicken it further. But yeah, I will leave those experiments for another time. Overall, I'm very happy with this. And yeah, I'm gonna just basically probably throw this into like a soup for lunch and call it good. I don't want to make the video too long, but yeah, I'm absolutely going to go ahead and go cook this and see what happens. All right, after gently simmering for a few minutes, this is what we have. We have a slight reduction in volume, likely from some evaporation, possibly also from a little bit of absorption, but probably a lot to do with the evaporation. It just sort of simmered on a very gentle kind of medium-low heat for about 10-ish minutes while I was taking care of some dishes. But you can see it thickened up quite considerably now that it's been cooked, and so that is good to know. A couple final notes and then I'm going to leave you. I'm very pleased with the texture that I was able to get with so little powder to water. Like, I'm still kind of blown away by that. Basically, one of the reasons, and so it's definitely chunky, it's not very smooth. I did not choose to sift and then re-powder my powder, largely because I feel like every time you do it, you lose some, and you see how dramatic the volume reduction is and how much is represented by each little teaspoon of powder. It's like you lose powder every single time you try to sift and do all of that. And so I just decided not to do that. If I ever needed something to be super smooth, I can kind of sift it myself afterwards and just end up with, you know, super fine powder. If I need it for some application later, I'll just sift my powder and then I'll put the chunks right back in, and they will do just fine for thickening soups or making, you know, puree or whatever. So I didn't do that kind of on purpose. But don't worry, none of my powder did go to waste. I did actually blend that up and turn it into a broth for soup that I made for lunch that day when I powdered. So you don't have to waste any of it. But yeah, you can get as much of it out as you can, but you never get it all. And so overall, like I said, I'm very pleased. I have some ideas. I'm brainstorming uses for the powder. If it were pre-cooked and I had dehydrated it as a pre-cooked puree, it would be more instant, but the way that it is now, I can see just from this quick test that we did, I am going to need to cook it a little bit before I use it, and that's totally fine with me. I'm mostly planning on using it in cooked applications anyway, but my wheels are turning for ideas, you know, like instant vegan cheese mixes, things like that, kind of based in butternut squash. Potential instant meals for traveling, camping, things like that. So I'm very excited about the idea of working this into my routine and seeing what happens. I'm absolutely buying that 20-pound box of squash from Azure Standard, and I'm looking forward to the experimentation. So hopefully you enjoyed that, got something good out of it, and I guess we'll see you in the next one. As always, I hope the rest of your day is good and your life stays wonderful. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.